I, Beatrice, a newly graduated architect, have always been a practical, down-to-earth person. I didn't believe in hauntings, in energies. But what started to happen there, in that apartment in downtown São Paulo in the middle of 2025, made me question everything. And it all began with a simple glance. My first rented apartment. A dream come true for an independent young woman like me. Small, but charming, in an old building full of history. The move was smooth. I arranged my furniture, my plants, my books. The bedroom, the living room, the kitchen, everything fit perfectly. But the bathroom, with that mirror fixed on the wall above the sink, was different. It was the point of disharmony in my new routine. Living in downtown São Paulo in 2025 means being surrounded by technology. My cell phone, my laptop, the smart TV in the living room, everything connected, buzzing with information. But in my bathroom, in that oldest corner of the apartment, modernity seemed to disappear. There, time seemed to have stopped. At first, I thought it was tiredness, the demanding routine of architecture. The mirror, I thought, distorted the image a little. But every day, every time I looked at myself to brush my teeth or put on makeup, the distortion became something more. It was as if, for a fraction of a second, my reflection wasn't mine. I saw a different expression. A look of deep sadness, almost despair. It wasn't my expression. I blinked, and my normal face returned. But that image, that shadow of anguish, stayed etched in my mind. It was as if another person was staring back at me. I tried to rationalize. The light coming from the window, accumulated sleep, maybe a little stress. But the feeling persisted, a constant chill down my neck. One morning, while brushing my teeth, I had a shock. I looked up and saw my reflection, standing still, with the same sad expression as always. But I had just moved. My reflection was delayed, like a slow-motion video. Fear paralyzed me. I stood still, watching. Then, slowly, I smiled. The reflection didn't follow. It remained with the melancholic expression, empty eyes, fixed on me. I abruptly pulled away from the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. This isn't possible, I thought. I must be imagining things, losing my sanity. From that day on, I started avoiding the bathroom mirror. I started using a small hand mirror I kept in the drawer. I tried to convince myself it was all nonsense, a fantasy in my head. But curiosity and above all the need to understand what was happening were too strong. One night, armed with courage, I stood in front of the mirror again. I stared at my reflection, looking for a logical explanation, a flaw in the glass, anything. Suddenly, my reflection blinked. But I hadn't blinked. From that night on, the events intensified. What were once mere glimpses were now almost concrete. I started seeing quick shapes moving in the corner of the mirror, shadows that didn't match anything in the room. They were like distortions in the air, or maybe distortions in my own vision. Once, while taking a shower, the semi-transparent plastic curtain of the shower box separated me from that object. I swore I saw the silhouette of an elderly woman, hunched over, standing behind me in the reflection, her hair disheveled, her body frail. When I turned around, there was no one in the bathroom. Fear consumed me. I felt watched, not just by the mirror, but by something that seemed to be behind it, or even inside it. You know that feeling of being watched, even when you're alone at home? That chill down your neck that has no explanation? It's a primitive fear, linked to our need for safety. When that feeling comes from something that should be familiar, like our own reflection, or a common object, the terror intensifies. It's like when we project our own fears or feelings onto another person or object. Was I projecting my own fears onto that mirror, or was there something more? I started having recurring nightmares, always the same scene. A cracked mirror, with the shadowy figure of a woman trying to get out of it. I would wake up in the middle of the night, bathed in sweat, my heart racing, with the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The bathroom light, a simple ceiling fixture, flickered frequently, even with the electrical installation checked. And sometimes I heard a faint whisper coming from the mirror. An indistinct sound, almost a lament, that seemed to call my name. Beatrice. Beatrice. The technology around me, which once brought me comfort, now seemed complicit in that terror. My cell phone, once a connection tool, started receiving messages from unknown numbers, with blurry photos of my own bathroom, always with a distorted shape in the corner of the mirror. I deleted them immediately, trembling, but they always returned. It was as if what haunted me could cross digital barriers. Desperate, but still trying to remain rational, I looked for the building manager, Mrs. Lucia, an elderly woman with white hair and tired eyes. I wanted to know about the apartment's previous residents. Mrs. Lucia, with a choked voice, told me. An elderly lady named Amelia had died there, in that exact apartment, a few years before. A lonely lady who lived secluded and spent most of her time looking at the mirror, according to the older neighbors. This information chilled me to the bone. Could it be possible that the former resident's energy was still there, trapped in the mirror? The mirror, which was once just an object, was now a portal. Amelia's story gave me a clue, but also a new fear. It was as if her loneliness, her fixation, had become soaked into the glass. Those dark spots on the edges of the mirror now seemed deeper, almost like dry veins or like paint stains that wouldn't come off, reflecting the pain of that life. One night, while getting ready to go out, a desperate attempt to have a normal life, I stopped in front of the mirror. My reflection seemed paler than usual, almost translucent, as if it was fading away. Suddenly, the expression changed, again. It was no longer sadness. It was anger. An intense hatred emanated from those reflected eyes that seemed not to be mine, but that stared at me with a chilling fury. And then, the reflection moved its mouth, and I heard a hoarse, distant voice coming directly from the mirror that whispered with a cutting coldness, "You shouldn't be here." I recoiled, stumbling, as the mirror began to vibrate lightly, and the bathroom lights flickered frantically. The smell of mold and something sweet, almost rotten, began to fill the room. The voice, that hoarse voice, coming from my own reflection, echoed in my mind for days. "You shouldn't be here." Those words haunted me. I tried to sleep, but the whisper seemed to materialize in the dark of my room, mixing with the sounds of the city. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the persistent dripping of the faucet in the sink, the creaking of the floorboards from the apartment above. Everything turned into part of that symphony of terror. I started to notice that common objects in the house seemed to move. The television in the living room, which was always off, turned on by itself in the middle of the night, showing a static screen full of noise, as if it were picking up a transmission from another place, another time. The cell phone, which I had tried to ignore, vibrated with missed calls from unknown number, and when I checked the history, there was nothing. It was as if the haunting was using technology to play tricks on me, to remind me of its presence. This, feeling that technology, something we use to connect and feel safe, can be used against us, is a very current fear. Think about virtual assistants, smart TVs that listen to what you say. It's when the mind, under stress, creates the illusion that we are being chased or controlled. It was as if the mirror and technology were orchestrating an attack on my sanity. Was my mind creating all of that, or was there something else truly haunting me? The nightmares became more vivid. I saw the figure of Mrs. Amelia, no longer as a shadow, but clearly. She was trapped inside the mirror, her eyes pleading for help, her hands banging on the glass as if she wanted to get out. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. I woke up gasping, smelling mold and sweetness, now stronger, coming from the bathroom. I was losing control. My work performance dropped. My friends called, but I couldn't answer. The outside world seemed distant, unreal. My universe was limited to those 4 rooms and the mirror that haunted me. One night, I decided to face it. I couldn't live like this anymore. I entered the bathroom, the lights flickering and trembling. The mirror was there, reflecting my tired face. I approached, my breath held, and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The reflection didn't answer. It just stared at me with an angry expression. And then, something moved in the back of the reflection. A small, dark figure. A child. It was behind me, in the mirror, with bright red eyes. The child. It appeared suddenly, a new element in that terrifying scene. Could it be Amelia's lost child? An even darker secret? The mirror, besides being a portal, was now a window to an unknown and painful past. I looked at the sink, and I saw an ordinary bar of soap with a small drawing of a child playing. A bar of soap I didn't even remember buying. Was it a new clue, or just a cruel coincidence? The child in the reflection pointed to something. Not at me, but to the opposite side of the bathroom, to the wall where the shower was. I looked at the wall, and there was nothing. But in the mirror, the image of the wall was different. There was a small door, camouflaged in the tile work, that I had never noticed before. A door that didn't exist in reality, only in the reflection. And the whisper from the mirror returned, clearer, louder. "She is in there?" The whisper, from the mirror, the clear and chilling words, "She is in there," froze me in place. I looked at the reflection, at the door that only existed there, and then at the real wall. I ran my hand over the cold tiles, looking for any sign of a crack, a frame, anything. Nothing. The wall was smooth, continuous, perfectly constructed. But the reflection showed the door with a terrifying, almost inviting clarity. The figure of Mrs. Amelia in the mirror now seemed to encourage me, her eyes fixed on the hidden door. The boy, the child, remained in the background, observing with a dark curiosity. It was as if they were guiding me to something, to a secret I needed to uncover. I decided I had nothing left to lose. I was exhausted, terrified, but also driven by a burning need to understand. I looked at the wall again. My fingers traced the lines of the tiles, and then I felt it. A slight unevenness, almost imperceptible. I started pressing, forcing, and to my horror, one of the tiles gave way, revealing a small crack. I used my fingernails to pull the tile. A dry sound of mortar breaking echoed in the bathroom. The tile came out, and behind it, there was a small opening. A dark, damp cavity with a dense, unpleasant smell of wet earth and something too sweet, almost sickening. Amelia's figure in. The mirror nodded. The child behind her smiled. A macabre, toothless smile. I reached out, hesitant, into the cavity. My fingers touched something cold and sticky. I pulled it out. It was a small doll, made of worn cloth, with button eyes and a coarse stitching for a mouth. And to my shock, the doll was holding something. A small photo, an old, faded photo. The photo of a child, a girl, with the same wide, empty eyes as the figure in the mirror. And the girl was Amelia as a child.
Ricardo's dark legacy. Ricardo was a huge fan of old things. His apartment in São Paulo in 2025 was like a museum of unique and interesting items, each with its own story. He lived and breathed these old treasures, each one whispering tales from long ago. One day, while looking through an online auction on his high-tech tablet, Ricardo found a mirror that caught his eye in a strange way. It was a big mirror with a dark wooden frame, fancy carvings that seemed to dance in the dim light. The seller claimed the mirror came from an old mansion, more than 100 years old, and had seen many lives. Ricardo, feeling a mix of fascination and curiosity, bought the mirror without thinking twice. When the mirror arrived, delivered by a shipping company that seemed to handle it with almost sacred respect, Ricardo was amazed by its beauty and size. It was bigger than he'd imagined, and its presence filled the room. He hung it on the living room wall above the unused fireplace, where it became the main focus of the decor, taking attention away from everything else there. But soon, strange things started to happen. Ricardo noticed that sometimes, when he looked in the mirror, he'd briefly see the reflection of a man behind him. A man with a dark face and sharp eyes, dressed in clothes that looked like they were from the last century. When he quickly turned around, the beige couch behind him was empty, the Persian rug on the floor untouched. There was no one there. At first, Ricardo thought it was just his imagination, maybe the reflection of another object in the living room, or the light from the lamp creating some trick. But the sightings became more frequent and clearer. The man in the mirror seemed to watch him, following his movements with his eyes. It wasn't a curious stare, but one of deep, almost ancient bitterness. Ricardo started to feel more and more uncomfortable around the mirror, a cold feeling of being watched, even when he was alone. It was as if the air in the room itself became heavier, thicker. One night, Ricardo was home alone. The 65-inch smart TV was off. The apartment was silent, only the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen breaking the quiet. He moved closer to the mirror, a strange need pulling him in. When he looked at himself, he saw the man reflected behind him clearer than ever. The man's face was marked by scars, maybe from a tough life, and his eyes were full of anger. Suddenly, the man's reflection smiled, a cold, threatening smile that wasn't Ricardo's. His own lips stayed still. And then the reflection moved its hand, a slow, heavy gesture, as if trying to touch Ricardo through the mirror. Scared, Ricardo started looking into the mirror's history, using his laptop and the vast internet of 2025. He managed to trace its origin back to that old mansion, an abandoned property on the outskirts of the city. He found out it had belonged to a man named Samuel, who had done terrible things in the past, stories that would make your blood run cold. Samuel was known for his cruelty, his coldness, and for causing suffering to many people before disappearing without a trace. There were rumors that his soul was trapped in the mansion and, possibly in an object that belonged to him, something he had valued above all else. This information gave Ricardo the chills. With this information, the events at Ricardo's house became more sinister. He started hearing whispers coming from the mirror, not just when he looked into it, but also when he walked by it. They were indistinct voices, like murmurs of a trapped crowd, that seemed to call his name. He felt a sense of heaviness in the room where the mirror was, as if the air was thicker there, making it hard to breathe. Objects near the mirror, a small antique pocket watch, a delicate bronze figurine, fell by themselves, without explanation, with sharp noises that echoed in the silence. Ricardo constantly felt like invisible eyes were watching him. The feeling of being a mouse in a trap. This feeling of being watched, of losing control over your own surroundings, is a fear we've all felt, even if subtly. It's like our home, our safe haven, turns against us. Psychology explains this as a form of depersonalization, where what's familiar becomes strange, and our perception of reality gets twisted. It's when the brain, under extreme stress, starts to interpret neutral events as threatening, creating a vicious cycle of anxiety and fear. Ricardo was experiencing this breakdown of familiarity. The very essence of his home was being corrupted. One night, Ricardo had a terrible nightmare. He dreamed he was trapped inside the mirror, the cold, claustrophobic glass all around him. Samuel's reflection chased him through the dark hallways of the mansion he'd researched, his heavy footsteps echoing. Samuel's face, in that dream, was twisted into a furious scream, his eyes bloodshot. Ricardo woke up screaming. The image of the man's enraged face burned into his mind, sweat dripping down his body. The air was cold and a metallic, almost rusty smell filled his room. The next day, Ricardo decided he needed to get rid of it. When he tried to take the mirror off the wall, Ricardo noticed it was strangely heavy, as if something was pulling it back, resisting. With great effort, his muscles burning, he managed to remove it, dragging it through the living room, down the hall, and to the front door. The wooden frame scratched the parquet floor, leaving permanent marks. He took it outside, to the cold gray sidewalk. As he placed it on the curb for the next morning's trash truck, he looked at the mirror, one last time. For a split second, he saw Samuel's reflection staring back at him, with a victorious smile on his lips. It was no longer a ghostly reflection. It was almost solid, a real presence. Samuel raised his hand again, but this time, it wasn't to touch. It was a goodbye, or perhaps an act of possession. Ricardo ran away, his heart pounding, feeling a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the night wind. In the following days and weeks, Ricardo felt an immense relief. The apartment seemed lighter, the air cleaner. The whispers stopped. The TV lights no longer turned on by themselves. He had gotten rid of the mirror, gotten rid of Samuel, or so he thought. A month later, while grocery shopping at the neighborhood supermarket, Ricardo stopped in front of the magazine section, looking for something to read. When he looked up, his eyes met his own reflection in the glass door of a freezer. For a fraction of a second, he saw right behind him the reflection of a man with a dark face and sharp eyes, dressed in old clothes. The same man, Samuel, and he was smiling. Ricardo quickly turned around, but the supermarket aisle was full of people, busy with their shopping, unaware of any invisible presence. There was no one. That victorious smile in the mirror's reflection, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a transfer. What Samuel wanted wasn't the mansion, nor the mirror. He wanted a new home, and he had found one. Have you ever thought that what's haunting you isn't a place or an object, but something that can attach itself to you? What we carry with us, the shadows of our own history, and those of others. Some energies, some presences, aren't limited to a house, to a mirror. They attach themselves to whoever finds them, to whoever awakens them. Did Samuel really leave? Or did he just find a new reflection? Yours.
Camila's dark legacy. Camila and her friends were curious teenagers who loved scary stories. On a rainy night during a sleepover, with the sound of rain hitting the windows of Camila's apartment in São Paulo, they decided to play an old ritual. They found online the mirror game. The legend said that by repeating certain words in front of a mirror at midnight, it was possible to glimpse the future or even contact the supernatural. For them, in 2025, with video calls and social media, technology, the idea of such an old-school mystery was fascinating. Despite their fear, curiosity won out. At exactly midnight, the digital clock on Camila's phone showing 0000, she locked herself in the bathroom with a full-length mirror. A simple mirror, with a white plastic frame, that reflected her anxious face. She followed the instructions, turned off the ceiling light, lit a single white candle she had in a drawer, and began to repeat the whispered words she had read on a dusty phone screen. At first, nothing happened. Camila started to feel silly, thinking it was all just teenage nonsense. Suddenly, she felt a shiver go down her spine. The candle flame began to flicker wildly, dancing and stretching, even though there was no draft in the closed room. And in the mirror behind her pale reflection, Camila saw a shadow move. It was a tall, thin figure with blurry outlines as if made of dissolving gray smoke. Fear took over Camila, and she immediately stopped the ritual, turning on the light, and running out of the bathroom, gasping for breath. That night, Camila couldn't sleep. The image of the shadow in the mirror wouldn't leave her mind. In the following days, she started noticing strange things happening around her. Quick glimpses of the same shadow in the corners of her eyes, a blur that disappeared as soon as she tried to focus. She heard faint whispers when she was alone in her room, indistinct sounds that seemed to come from the walls or the ventilation. There was a constant feeling of being watched, a pressure in her chest that kept her from relaxing. Camilla tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, the result of the fear from that night, her mind playing tricks. However, the sightings became more frequent and more intense. Camilla saw the shadow reflected on other shiny surfaces, not just in mirrors. Once she briefly saw it in the living room window, reflected in the city landscape outside. Another time on the dark screen of her own cell phone, the image distorted for a moment. The psychological terror was setting in, making Camilla question her own sanity. She wondered if she was losing control of her mind, if this was real, or if she was in fact going crazy. Camilla's fear grew when she started seeing the shadow not just in reflections, but also directly in dark corners of her room at the end of the tiled hallway. The figure seemed clearer now, and Camilla could vaguely make out a pair of bright, empty eyes, like dying embers in the darkness. She felt an intense cold, which wasn't the air conditioning, whenever the shadow was near, and had the feeling that something was trying to communicate with her, though she couldn't understand what. They were fragments of words, muffled moans, as if the shadow itself was in agony. Desperate, Camilla told her friends what was happening. At first, they didn't believe her. They laughed, called her dramatic. But after witnessing some of the strange events themselves, like the house lights flickering when Camilla talked about the shadow, or the living room radio turning on by itself, and playing an old distorted tune, they got scared too. Together, during research sessions on a laptop, they discovered that the ritual they had done was considered dangerous by some occult traditions, as it could open portals to other dimensions, or attract negative entities. Camilla's experience and what she felt is something many of us can understand. Think about how fear and expectation can shape what we see and hear. When we prepare for something scary, our mind becomes more sensitive to interpreting any noise or blur as part of that experience. The belief in the ritual, the fear of the unknown, and the strong impression of the shadow in the mirror triggered a series of events that, though terrifying, might have been manifestations of her own mind in a vulnerable state, trying to make sense of the unexplainable. Terrified by the consequences of her game, Camilla sought help. She talked to her parents, who, worried, took her to a psychologist. The therapist, with a calm and understanding voice, explained that intense fear and anxiety can show up in many ways, including seeing and hearing things that aren't there. He helped her understand that her mind might be processing the fear from that night in a twisted way, creating the shadow's appearances as a way to protect her, or maybe even as a warning. With time and therapy, the shadow's appearances began to fade. Camilla learned to control her anxiety and to tell the difference between reality and what her mind was imagining. She still felt a shiver when she passed mirrors in dark hallways and avoided being alone in the dark for too long, but the terror had lessened. The experience left its mark, with a lingering fear of mirrors and darkness, but also with a greater understanding of the power of the mind and how our beliefs affect what we perceive. She understood that the real doors sometimes don't open to other dimensions, but to the deepest parts of our own minds. Camilla's story reminds us how powerful our mind can be and how our expectations can shape our perceived reality. But it also raises a question. What if, even if science explains it, there's something more? What if the things we see that aren't, there are just a way for something, in fact, to communicate? Camilla never played the mirror game again. But every now and then, when she passed an old mirror in a shop or saw an unexpected reflection on a shiny surface, she felt a slight chill down her spine. A reminder that what we see isn't always just in our mind. Sometimes the reflection, it sees you back.